So, thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me, Nada, Barbara, and the group. My name is Jeff Halper, and I'm an Israeli political activist. I had an organization. It's called the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, which is an Israeli political group on the left that's trying to fight the Israeli occupation and to achieve a just peace between Israelis and Palestinians, whatever that means. That's a whole other lecture that I also do. What it essentially means is that, our view is that the two-state solution is finished and gone and over, and we have to begin to think about one democratic state in Israel-Palestine. That's inclusive of everyone. But that's another story. But over all the years that I've been an activist, the question has always been in the back of my mind, how does Israel get away with this? It's 50 years of occupation, neo-colonialism in a world where colonialism has sort of long since disappeared, at least in its visible form. Violations of human rights, massive violations of international law, brutality, and it's very much in the news, in the media. I mean, this is happening in the Holy Land, on the southern border of Europe, one of the most popular tourist sites in the world. So it's not hidden from view. It's out there. It's happening in a European country, in a country that sees itself as a part of Europe, and in some ways is a part of Europe. Israel's a part of the Eurovision contest, the highlight of Western culture. We're in the European Football League. We're often the European basketball champions. So, there is a certain European connection, even though geographically we're in the Middle East. So the question really, it always was in the back of my mind, how does Israel get away with this? And the usual explanations didn't really work. What you often hear is, well, there's a Jewish lobby, which is strong in the US. I mean, it doesn't run the United States. It's a strong lobby, but that doesn't explain Europe and European support for Israel. Well, then you could say, guilt over the Holocaust. Well, that might work in a couple countries, Germany maybe, but that doesn't work in the United States. And Americans don't even know there was a Holocaust. It happened more than 5 years ago, so it's not part of their mentality. So that doesn't really explain. Christian fundamentalists or Christian Zionists, and they have an impact in the US, but that doesn't really explain Europe, or countries that have become very supportive of Israel. China, for example, or India, or Nigeria, or Brazil. So really, how do you explain that? How do you explain the support that Israel gets for all its occupation that allows it actually to maintain its occupation? So all these years I was kind of looking down on the Israeli occupation, what Israel is doing, and really being shocked by Israeli actions and not understanding how Israel possibly sells this and gets support for it. But when you look up, but I said one day, what if I looked up instead of down at Israel's role in the world? So if you look up, all of a sudden a whole different picture begins to emerge of the Israeli presence in the wider world. And instead of seeing this little country, fighting with Palestinians and so on, isolated in some ways, you begin to see that in terms of its arms and security and policing relationships, Israel is really at the center of one of the largest industries in the world. If you take the military and security and policing, these are all aspects that are really one thing. Armies today, especially armies in the West, are basically engaged in police actions. And the police forces in all our countries are being militarized. So that it's really one kind of a thing. And if you take the military, security, and policing together, it's about a 2.5 trillion euro industry a year. I mean, 2.5 trillion euros. I mean, it's got to have a huge effect on economies all over the world, especially because some of the poorest countries are the biggest arms buyers. Tremendous impact on politics, on societies throughout the world, on women, on children, on societies in general. And yet, one reason why I wrote this book was that it's a blind spot on the agenda of the left. The left around the world doesn't know very much about the military. And I put myself in that category. I'm not a big military guy. I couldn't tell you a rifle from a tank. I mean, I don't know this stuff either. But the fact that we're talking about a left agenda, to the degree that we do, issues of the environment, or issues of violence, or issues of development, or women's issues, all the different issues that we have on the left, without really perceiving this huge elephant in the room, this huge impact of the military and security and policing on the global life and economy, means that we're missing something pretty major in our analysis. So what I tried to do is not only, so what I tried to do then was to say, well, then there looks like there's a quid pro quo. In other words, that Israel is getting support from the international community because it's offering something, it's delivering something. Now, what could little Israel, that isn't much bigger than Slovenia, what does little Israel have to offer the United States, or China, or Nigeria? And so looking at Zionist history, Zionism has always been against the grain. Even when it began 100 years ago, you were already beginning to get real reactions against colonialism. You began to have the emergence of colonial peoples, so that Zionism always was sort of fighting against the current. So one of the strategies of Zionism was to serve the hegemons, serve the powers that be. Look at who's running the world and find ways of serving them. And you begin with Theodor Herzl, who was the founder, kind of the father of Zionism, an Austrian Jew, who tries to convince the Ottoman Sultan in the 1890s to give a charter to the Zionist movement over Palestine. That Zionism would help the Sultan against Arabs and against Armenians and against any peoples that were trying to rise up against the Ottoman Empire. That didn't work. So he went to meet the German Kaiser. Kaiser Wilhelm, who was a very important ally of the Germans, came to Jerusalem in 1898. And Herzl ran to Jerusalem to meet him. And there's this pathetic picture of Herzl at the foot of this huge horse, huge white horse that the Kaiser had, probably the biggest horse in Europe, and he's on top of the horse in his Prussian military uniform with his Prussian helmet with a spike on top. I mean, the guy must have been 5 meters tall, sitting on this horse looking down at Theodor Herzl. And Herzl was saying, please, could I have Palestine? And the Kaiser kind of turns around and walks away and rides away. So that didn't work. But then after World War I, the Zionists did succeed in recruiting England as its great power ally. In 1917, you have the Balfour Declaration, which really gave Zionism a legitimate and important role in British and European diplomacy. That's really what put Zionism on the map. And then after 1948, you have the rise of Israel. In 1948, France became the main patron of Israel. Until today, the Israeli military industry is largely French. The French Mirage planes became the basis of the Israeli aeronautic industry. Israel's nuclear industry began with France. And then in 1967, during the war in 67, France declared a boycott on Israel. And so Israel shifted to the Americans, being their patrons. So all the way through, Israel is looking for patrons. Well, okay, that's a great strategy. But what do you have to offer? I mean, you're a country of 5, 6, 7 million people. What do you have to offer these patrons? And one of the things that Israel offers to hegemons throughout the world is expertise in how to control people that it's learned on the Palestinians. In other words, Israel is really, in a way, one of the world's experts as a country in terms of what's called counterinsurgency, asymmetrical warfare, low-intensity warfare, what we could call wars amongst the people. War today is not interstate warfare. It's not World War II. It's not Korea. But it's wars amongst peoples. It's wars fought in cities. It's wars fought against non-state actors. Those kinds of wars. So in some ways, I talk about how Israel is globalizing Palestine. In many ways, the war that Israel is fighting against the Palestinians is a miniature of the same kind of war that the global north is fighting against the global south. So that already makes Israel kind of relevant. So Israel has a strategy, and it's very clear. It's even articulated in the Ministry of Defense. A strategy is called niche filling. Israel looks around the world, and it looks at what do the elites need in order to stay in power, in order to control the people. You see? And by elites, I mean, and this is also kind of interesting, elites all through the world system. So that Israel, as we know, is very strong in the global north, militarily. In other words, Israel not only, you see, it has a very kind of what I call a pivotal position, Israel. It's not obviously the major military power in the world, although it's pretty high up there. Israel is the third or fourth largest arms exporter, kind of tied with France. So it's pretty high up. But nevertheless, there's a lot of other countries and commercial companies involved. But Israel has kind of a special place, because on the one hand, it's very close to the major powers. You know, it's in the EU neighborhood. Israel gets more funding, research and development funding from the EU than any other non-European country. A lot of its military is funded by the EU, by your tax dollars, now through what's called Horizon 2020. But Israel has a special relationship with the United States, where it gets about $4 billion a year in cutting-edge weaponry and privileged access to American military technology. But Israel is also very close to what I call local hegemons. Mexican drug cartels, Eastern European mafias, warlords in different African countries. Israel is right there wherever there's an elite, whether it's a non-state elite or a state elite, trying to have power and control. Israel, of course, is very experienced in conventional warfare. It's fought 5 or 6 actual wars with Egypt and Syria, in Lebanon, Jordan, and so on. But at the same time, its expertise is warfare amongst the people. What it fights with the Palestinians, a kind of counterinsurgency. And Israel is very sophisticated in high-tech weapons, but at the same time, it knows how to make its weapons field friendly. So soldiers, even child soldiers in Africa, can use them. Israel now, for example, is providing arms to South Sudan militias, and the South Sudanese army that uses a lot of child soldiers. So you've got to have weapons that they can use. So Israel kind of is able to serve a wider range of powers than, let's say, the United States or Europe. The United States and Europe have very sophisticated arsenals and armies and weapons, but they're not really relevant for the types of fighting, of wars amongst the people. So Israel has that kind of a special role. And so what you find is that Israel is able to participate with the other major powers in global north armaments. In Europe, I mean, every country in Europe, including Slovenia, has military ties with Israel. I mean, I'm not an expert in Slovenia, but you sold a couple $1 million worth of military goods last year, which isn't a lot, but you're getting there. You're a small country. But you know, there's no country that's sort of outside of this story. But Israel has very strong relations. You know, Germany's building nuclear submarines. Israel is developing the new Watchkeeper drone, which is going to be the European drone, military drone. And there's a lot of things, high tech with Ireland and so on. Of course, again, Israel's very strong with the United States and Canada. But what's interesting is you also there's a whole group of countries that are starting to challenge Euro-American hegemony. And those are what we call the BRICS countries, if you know that term. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, that actually meet. I mean, they have summit meetings every couple of years. They're considering developing an alternative World Bank that would fund infrastructure in the global South. I mean, these are countries with major economies that will be challenging Europe and the United States in the next couple of decades. And you can add to the BRICS countries what are called the MINT countries, which are Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. And what you find from that range of counter-hegemons, these are countries that in some ways are challenging Europe and the United States, is that Israel is strong in every single one of those countries. It provides security, it trains the police, it trains the security forces, it has strong military ties. Look, Israel is the number 2 or 3 arms supplier to China after Russia. Israel's kind of tied with France in terms of servicing China. Well, the Americans are moving the whole 6th Fleet into the South Pacific to contain China. China is the great rival these days of the U.S. Israel's supposed to be, the client of the U.S. We love the U.S., we share values with the U.S., we talk in the Congress all the time, and yet Israel is providing arms and technologies to the main rival of the U.S. India. Israel is the 2nd, 3rd, 4th largest arms supplier to India. That's pretty good, to be the 2nd or 3rd largest arms supplier to the 2 largest militaries in the world. So this has to do with what I call security politics. Security politics, when there's a logic to international relations. And we're always trying to see what the interests are and why one country has an alliance with another or has a fight with others and so on. But when you put the military into the equation, the arms and security and policing and so on, a whole different constellation of relations emerges. So it turns out that Israel is very close to Saudi Arabia. I mean, you could never expect that in terms of ideology or in terms of the history of the 2 countries. You'd think that they'd be deadly enemies, which they are on one. We talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict as if that's the conflict. But in fact, beyond that, Israel is very close to Saudi Arabia because they have common security interests against the Shiites, against democratic forces in the Arab world, and so on. So, you know, there's a saying that, you know, money has no taste or odor. I mean, money is money, and everybody's, you know, and that's certainly true in terms of military security relations. It bypasses ideologies. It bypasses seeming enmities, and all of a sudden you begin to see relationships that you didn't see before. So that Israel is very close to the BRICS countries. I mean, Turkey, just this week, Erdogan said, Turkey needs Israel. It's having a fight with Israel now, partly over Gaza, but Turkey needs Israel. So that's where the security politics comes in. But at the same time, it's not only the BRICS mint countries and the global north, but again, Israel is very involved in the entire global south. There's almost no country in the world where you don't have a strong Israeli presence. If it's not military, they're training your security forces, your presidential guard, your special operations units, or your police forces. So the Israeli reach is very deep. And that's, I think, what creates that quid pro quo. In other words, that's what explains why Israel gets the support that it gets. I'll give you just one example. Nigeria. That's always been pro-Palestinian. Has a very large Muslim population. It's always been one of the leading African countries in support of the Palestinians. Last year, there was a vote in the UN, in the Security Council, to support the Palestinians. It was kind of a resolution to limit negotiations so that they wouldn't go on forever. And the Palestinians knew the Americans would veto, but that was the idea, to get the Americans to veto and to show how isolated they are in the rest of the world, and to show what the problem is. But to do that, to force an American veto, they needed the majority of members of the Security Council to support this resolution. And one of the members of the Security Council at that time was Nigeria. That was all, they just counted it right away in their column. Nigeria is with us. And it comes down to the vote, and at the last minute, Nigeria abstained. And the vote failed, and the Americans didn't have to veto. And the whole thing just dissipated. And the Nigerians said afterwards, we did that because Israel is the only country that's helping us with Boko Haram. You know, I mean, it was a clear quid pro quo. And in fact, there's an international boycott of weapons in Nigeria. Even Europe and the US boycott Nigeria. They don't allow weapons to be delivered because it turns out the Nigerian army is worse than Boko Haram. But Israel bypasses all of that, and that's that quid pro quo. So if you multiply that worldwide, you begin to see why Israel gets away with it. But I also wanted to go one step further. I mean, that's sort of on one level. It kind of makes sense, and you can understand it. But there's something even bigger going on. And that is, I think we're not, on the left, we're not dealing with the big issue. And that is capitalism, the capitalist world system. I mean, we just don't, especially in the young generations, we don't talk about it very much. You get Naomi Klein, who writes a shock doctrine, and you have Chomsky a little bit, and David Harvey, a couple of people. But capitalism isn't one of the big issues of the left in the world, the capitalist system per se. We fight particular pieces of it, like maybe neoliberalism here or there, or privatization, with drones, maybe some women's issues and stuff, but we don't look at the big world system. We're not looking at the big world system. And in fact, capitalism is pretty much won, especially after 1989. I mean, it's it's one. I mean, the world is capitalist. There's no more places where it can expand into. And it reminds me of kind of a joke. There's a joke about one fish. It says to another fish, "How's the water?" And the other fish says, "What water?" You know. Or there's another version where the other fish says, "What's water?" In other words, we're living in this water. We're living in this sea of capitalism that we're not perceiving, and we're not fighting it. And not only that, we're not conceptualizing it and seeing how it works. And part of the capitalist system that we're not seeing is this whole part of enforcing its hegemony. Because it's hard to explain the wars going on today, wars against the people, unless you see them as resource wars. And wars of trying to take the resources of people and exclude them from the system, so that 2/3 of humanity are considered surplus humanity by the corporations and so on. So that you can't separate the worldwide military security policing system from capitalism enforcing, managing the world system. It's a part of that bigger story. And yet it isn't really, again, something that the left knows very much about. I don't even remember when there was, sometimes there's a demonstration against a particular thing, against the war in Iraq, or maybe the war in Libya, and here and there, but overall, this whole issue, again, of enforcing capitalist hegemony around the world, and what that causes isn't really an issue of the left. Maybe it's too big. But at the same time, we don't know anything about the military. I mean, we don't know, I don't know, I'm just projecting for myself. You know, we're talking about a €2.5 trillion a year industry with access to the most cutting edge technologies, nanotechnologies and genetics and robotics and all kinds of fields that we don't really appreciate. So we don't really know the power that they have. We don't know what we're facing in terms of, if we ever became effective as a left, what we would face in terms of repression. And it's very hard for us even to fight repression because it's not much on our agenda. So one reason why I wrote the book also was to call more attention to this part of the capitalist system of enforcing capitalist hegemony on all of us. And in particular, there's something very, very interesting. And that is that the way capitalism is enforcing its hegemony over us is pretty invisible, because it's done through more policing than through the military. So we have an anti-war movement. There is in the world an anti-war movement and so on. But in some ways, it's sort of that's the most visible part of capitalist and big power, and the elites imposing their powers on others. The military, the army, that's the most obvious. The weapons are sexy, they're big tanks, and there's ships, and there's airplanes and nuclear missiles and big things like that. But in fact, we're in a situation today of a capitalist system that's one. The world is capitalist. There aren't any more islands that are even very anti-capitalist. There's some that are systemically against capitalism, but are being fought against. But basically, there's no more islands that haven't been incorporated into the capitalist system. It's not expanding anymore. So what that means is that, unlike the years of imperialism, you don't need military operations anymore. I mean, you're not conquering anything anymore. Colonial wars are pretty much finished. What you need to do, this whole system where once you had military operations, and then you had colonialism in one form or another, and you kept the order and policed colonial peoples, and then somehow you talked about, we're the civilized people, and you explained why you had to civilize India. All that is over now. So where we are today is this whole thing is turned around. And that is that what you have to convince people today is the system, the sea that we're living in. We're the fish, that there is no sea, or the sea is very benevolent. And you do that, hegemony tries to be very friendly. You don't want people to get the feeling that they're being controlled or ruled or dominated or manipulated. So hegemony is friendly. It's Hollywood, it's the music we have, McDonald's, as much as possible, those kinds of friendly faces of capitalism. That's kind of the framing. And that's what you learn in school, and that's what you see in the media, and that's the consumerism and all of that. But, but when you do have resistance, whether it's ISIS type resistance, Al-Qaeda, or whether it's crime, or whether it's Occupy Wall Street, with middle class people beginning to say, the young people saying we're more and more excluded from this system, you have what's called war amongst the people. And this is, in other words, capitalism has this iron fist within the velvet glove. I mean, it's able to enforce its hegemony, but it does so in ways of policing, in ways that aren't not wars. Wars today aren't interstate wars anymore. Wars today are amongst the people, so it tends to be more policing. We don't pay much attention to policing. The weapons of police aren't very interesting. They're usually small arms. Police are pretty routine. So we don't see them as agents of repression, although in fact it's the police side of war that's actually become the most repressive today, all over the world. Right? Our armies are out in Syria policing, not really fighting a war in the traditional sense. And then the military operations become kind of irrelevant. So if we just look at the way wars are today in the world, what we see is conventional interstate wars. What we think of as wars are gone. You don't have them anymore. You have a few episodic wars, like the Iran-Iraq War, or the 1973 War of Israel, Egypt, Syria, or the Falklands War. Great Britain against sort of Argentina. You have small episodic wars, but they're very episodic and very small scale in a sense. So what's ironic then is that the types of weapons you need, that the capitalist system needs to enforce its hegemony, are irrelevant. You don't need Trident nuclear missiles. You don't need F-35s. You don't need these sexy big trillion-dollar weapon systems. You need the kinds of weapons that Israel has. And because you're fighting today two kinds of wars around the world. One, and these are wars against the people. One is what's sometimes called hybrid wars, asymmetrical conflicts, low-intensity conflicts. There's a million terms for them. Fighting against the people. Whether it's in Europe, or whether it's in Ferguson in the United States, or whether it's in Syria or Mexico, these are wars against the people. And they're wars for resources, and they're wars for, for control of economies and so on. So you've got all kinds of wars like these against non-state actors, including all kinds of wars that are called wars that are other than war, or short of war, and so on. And then within our societies, there's a kind of securocratic warfare going on, of security. I mean, that's a term you hear all the time, I'm sure here as well, but certainly in France today, which is under a formal state of emergency. The idea of security, and we're all insecure, and we have to become secured against terrorists and against all kinds of threats. So you begin to have securocratic wars that are actually class wars. So you have a situation where war has actually become a form of policing And policing has become a form of war. But these are aspects of control within the capitalist system today that we don't deal with, that we don't see, that aren't issues for us. This whole and that's the niche. This is the niche that Israel has taken. So both on the level of not only how does Israel get away with it, that Israel is sort of the window into a bigger system of what is the role of militaries, but especially security forces and policing and technologies in controlling us. So that as long as everything is fine and we're all pretty middle class and we behave ourselves, we don't feel that. But when we begin and in neoliberalism, as more and more of us become excluded, especially the young generation, from the system, and start to resist, you're going to feel more and more this enforced control. And without being able to conceive of it or have strategies of how to resist it, you're pretty vulnerable to that sort of a thing. So one of my goals in writing the book was also to sort of raise the issue of what are these technologies, to raise awareness of military security technologies, using Israel as the vehicle. Israel is useful, first of all, because it has technologies that are geared toward this war against the people. And second, because it's a small country, so it has to scramble. And in the scrambling and finding niches that, let's say, Britain doesn't have to do so much, or the United States, it reveals the way the system works. So let me just, in a couple of words, in a few minutes, talk about 4 niches that Israel has developed in terms of what I call global pacification. And this is a term that I think we should start to use more, because obviously the end goal of the capitalist system is to pacify us. I mean, it's pacified most of us. Most people, at least most middle class people, or certain middle class people, maybe they're getting fewer and fewer, have been fairly pacified. I mean, your government seems to be pretty pacified. But at the same time, like I say, the more people are excluded and the more resistance there is, the more pacification will... Now, pacification in English has the meaning of repression to a point where resistance is impossible. This is exactly what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. It wants to get to a point, not where the repression ends, because repression will be permanent. The occupation will never end. But that the Palestinians will be pacified and unable to resist. And so in globalizing that, Israel is helping other elites that have the same problem. How do you keep the middle classes pacified? How do you keep immigrants, refugees, poor people, peoples of color that are excluded in one or another pacified? So pacification, I think, is a key term. And Israel's niches are designed towards that. So one niche that Israel has is high-tech weaponry and components for systems. I'm not going to get into this too much, because this is more conventional warfare. Israel is very strong in conventional warfare. It has nuclear missiles. Now, what's interesting is everybody's so concerned about Iran, but it looks to me like Slovenia, in here somewhere, is pretty close to, is within easy range of Israeli nuclear missiles. Israel has 200 to 300 nuclear warheads and a whole missile system, especially the Jericho intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach anywhere in Europe, plus far beyond. So, here's an issue of a country, an unstable country, kind of a rogue state, Israel, that does all kinds of crazy things, that has nuclear weapons, with your country within their range, and somehow everybody's concerned about Iran. Israel, of course, has its own jet airplanes that it exports, but also American and some European conventional warfare. Israel makes tanks, produces tanks, missiles, Israeli missiles. There's a variety of missile systems. But one of the interesting things when you see how they're sold, like the Gabriel missile, combat proven. It's combat proven. So here's where you begin to see why Israel doesn't want to give up the occupied territories, won't give up control of the Palestinians. It has nothing to do with Zionism and the land of Israel and God gave it to us and all that stuff. It has to do with the fact that the occupied territories are a laboratory. Israel is one of the few countries, maybe the only country, that has 4.5 million people that it can experiment on. It can do anything it wants to Palestinians. We have hundreds of checkpoints, you know, where we perfect all kinds of surveillance and biometric devices. So it's no surprise that Israel is the world's leader in airport security. You know, and the ability to not only to develop weapons, high-tech weapons, but to test them constantly on Palestinians gives you an edge in the market. So that's one reason why I think Israeli weapons have that edge, and why Israel, you know, would find it counterproductive to give up its laboratory. You know, and you begin to see that in fact the Palestinians are almost irrelevant. They're the guinea pigs that you experiment on, but they're not the source of anxiety for Israelis. Here Israel is taking delivery of 9 nuclear-capable submarines. You can't tell me the nuclear submarines designed to fight Tulkarm. You know, these are obviously huge military weapons that have an agenda that's regional, not based on Palestinians. And so it begins to raise questions about what? And all kinds of other high-tech things I won't get into, including cyber warfare. Israel is one of the world's leaders in cyber warfare, which is a new kind of warfare that we also don't know very much about. Okay. Now let's get into more securitization. And there's a concept called weapons of suppression. These are weapons designed to be used against people. I mean, not just tanks and ships, but actual suppression of people. And these are weapons that Israel, again, is expert in. And one of them is satellites, spy satellites. Israel has several series of spy and communication satellites in space. Israel is one of the 7 countries in the world that's capable of launching its own satellites. And what's interesting is it launches them from Azerbaijan, which is a Muslim country to the north of Iran. So, you know, again, security politics goes around ideologies. Now, this is the orbit. There's the OFEC satellite system. Just to show you the connection, your Facebook just paid $100 million to an Israeli military company for access to OFEC 10, which is a new spy satellite that Israel is going to launch in the next month or two that will give Facebook access to Africa in a way that it doesn't have access today. So there's a direct connection between our own ability to communicate with each other, our own lives, and the military, and especially the Israeli military. A whole technology I'm not going to get into tonight is nanotechnology, which is something we don't know very much about. You know, a nano is a billionth of a meter. It's the size of a molecule. So you have, for example, a weapon that's been developed. It might have been deployed in Gaza, we're not sure. It's called smart dust. And that is, let's say I want to find somebody in Ljubljani, I want to find somebody in Gaza. I can simply spray an area with this kind of a dust, a nanodust. Now, the particles that are as small as dust are in fact sensors. So I can program into those nanosensors anyone's DNA. So I can spray a whole city or a region, and boom, that DNA will pop up. And I can find that person and kill them or assassinate them or whatever I want to do. But you can also program nanodust, for example, to attack the nervous systems of entire populations. You could paralyze an entire population with this kind of a dust. You could target parts of their brain to make them forget. It's a kind of a biological weapon. And in fact, each one of these robots is called a nanobot or a nano warrior. And they can be enhanced. I mean, the coming together of these fields of science. Now, one reason why I'm doing all this is that most of us on the left, not all of us, but most of us on the left, don't know anything about science. We don't come from the scientific world. We're from the humanities or the social sciences. How many people in this room would define themselves coming from the hard sciences? Physics, chemistry, you know. Okay, so 2, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's actually a fairly large proportion. Most of my audiences, it's 6 out of 200. You know, but still the point is made that most of us don't know this world, and we're not in communication with people from that world, so that we don't know the kinds of technologies that are being developed, and of course the trillions of dollars that are being put into that kind of research. So, for example, with nanobots, you're having the combining of nanotechnology, genetics, but also artificial intelligence. So you could enhance. There's a concept called enhanced artificial intelligence, which is these nanobots, these little nanorobots, warriors, can be made smarter than we are, much smarter than we are, and with artificial intelligence, much smarter, and able to learn on their own. You see, now you've got interesting things. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but these are serious military matters. You've got a whole concept of a nano wall that the Pentagon has really talked about a lot. And that is, all right, you're producing nano warriors with enhanced artificial intelligence. Because if you're in a war, you can't program a warrior what to do. A warrior's got to figure it out for itself, right? So you've got billions of these nano warriors doing whatever you think you want them to do. Well, nano warriors are also self-replicating. One nanobot can reproduce 1 trillion times within 3 hours. So they're self-replicating, making trillions of more that are smarter than you are. Now the problem is when you have replication, including in human beings, you have mutants. Things don't replicate absolutely, you know. Now you have trillions and trillions multiplying. You're going to get some rogue nanobots that are pretty deadly and pretty smart. So the question that arises in the military, and it's a real question, is how do we protect ourselves against nanobots that will turn against us? And one of the answers is to try to create a nano wall of nano warriors that are loyal to us against the nano warriors we created that are, I mean, it sounds science fiction. And for those of us that aren't in science, it really sounds science fiction. But this is all real immediate science and military technology. And these are the kinds of weapons that are being developed that we don't know very much about on the left. And we're certainly not programming that into our resistance to what's happening in the world. Drones are another kind of weapon of suppression. Israel produces 40% of the world's drones. And again, just in a word, this whole technology comes out of the conception of warfare. Drone technology has been known since the 1970s. Why didn't Europe and the US develop drones? Why Israel? Because the US and Europe are thinking in terms of warfare in the traditional interstate meaning. Well, in warfare, a drone is a stupid weapon. What does a drone do? It hangs in the air. It loiters. It hovers. In other words, that's the point of a drone, is it does what humans can't do. It hovers over an area for weeks and months, maybe years, just tracking who's going in and out. Or what, something will drive a human being nuts after 2 hours. And that's what they do. And then at a certain point they can kill, or they simply map and they track and so on. Well, they're easy to shoot down in a war because they're just hanging there. So the Americans said, well, we don't want that stupid weapon, But the Israelis were fighting another kind of warfare. The Israelis were fighting war amongst the people, against Palestinians, against Hezbollah. Well, they don't have air forces. They can't shoot down drones. So a drone becomes a perfect counterinsurgency weapon to be used against people. It's maybe not very good against armies, but against Palestinians or ISIS or third world peoples or you in cities, these are perfect weapons. And so that's why Israel was the one that developed. I mean, you can see there's a connection between your concept of war and what weapons you need and how you're going to apply them. All kinds of other weapons, I won't get into all this now, including bulldozers designed specifically by the Israeli army to demolish Palestinian homes. These are weapons of suppression. A third niche that Israel has is models of securitization. And here's where we start to get into policing. Because Israel is really policing the occupied territories. They're not engaged in a hot war. It's policing, and that's what Israel is exporting to countries of the world, is this policing securitization control. So, for example, Israel specializes in autonomous weapon systems, not robotic, or not remote control, but these are weapon systems that themselves decide who to kill. You program into it, and this brings up a whole question of ethics, but really a question of politics. When machines decide who the enemy is, and who to kill, and who to wound, and so on, and these are the kinds of autonomous, robotic machines that Israel has around Gaza. So when you hear about 5 Palestinian farmers were killed, it wasn't by the army per se. It was by some autonomous weapon system that decided that they're breaking certain parameters and they're to be killed. Surveillance, all kinds of surveillance devices, again coming out of checkpoints in particular, that are being adopted by police forces and municipalities all over the world that are Israeli. Now this comes out of an Israeli company's website called Nice Systems. How's that for a name? Nice Systems, which is one of the big companies. And it's interesting, they call our countries security states. Forget democracies, forget people's republics or however we see our countries. They're being considered security states, where security trumps everything. And in a security state, what's the greatest threat, according to Nice Systems? What they call spaces of anonymity. That's the threat. If the state doesn't know where you are, and who you're hanging out with, and what you're talking about, if there's spaces of anonymity that aren't surveyed and aren't recorded, the state gets very anxious. These are areas, and Together with that are exceptional spaces. In other words, they want us to all live in unexceptional spaces, in places that are simply transparent and known, and then they leave us alone. And that's why you get the feeling of security, because most of us, aren't subversive, and we hang out in McDonald's and we walk downtown and we go out and, we're unexceptional people in unexceptional spaces. But if you take a place like this, for example, this would be it's kind of a cave, and I don't know if it's, if you can get, there is a camera here, so we're being covered. But, this could be considered a space of an exceptional space, or a space of anonymity. So that there's conceptions here of how you destroy, what security really means in a totalizing way. And there's all kinds of other technologies, drones that can be mini drones too. If you want a BDS target, I don't know if the Technion, which is Israel's largest polytechnic, has relations with the Slovenian university. But that would be a BDS target, because the Technion is Israel's largest military laboratory. So it develops, for example, drones that mimic insects. How's this for a drone? That can be on the tip of a finger. That can be attached with poisons or cameras or whatever, and even weaponizing insects themselves. So you never know what a weapon is. It could be some fly outside or in here, and it can be actually a fly with a sensor in it. Down to the policing. You see, down to policing, all kinds of police weapons that, again, we don't know very much because these are very unsexy. What do we know about police? We know a little bit about drones, but we don't know very much about different kinds of weapons that police use, including tear gas, all kinds of crowd control methods. These are all weapons of suppression. All right, and finally, a niche of Israel is what we call framing. And lawfare, I'm not going to get into that right now, but framing is key because, like I said before, the whole system works on you buying into it. You see, so it has to frame itself. The way it avoids having to do all this stuff is to bring you in and have you identify with the system and be part of the system. And why would you want to resist it then? So that the whole idea is framing. How do you make it look friendly? How do you make it look attractive? How do you create an identity with it? So, for example, and how do you do that with a war? Well, Israel's been pretty successful in selling its occupation. Again, you've got an occupation of 50 years with all the violations we talked about, and yet Israel is, if you go out in the street, I bet you most people would say Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. Or Israel is a good, European country against terrorism. You certainly wouldn't apply terrorism to Israel. But how do you do that? And that's, of course, the trick of capitalism. How do you present it, what's a really very oppressive system, in a way that people look at it and identify with it? So Israel is expert at framing. So, for example, here, after Operation Cast Lead in Gaza in 2008 and 2009, the Chinese army sent its spokesman, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, no less, to Israel to learn how Israel sold cast lead, that operation in Gaza. Because if the Chinese can learn, you could do that with Tibet. That'd be great. Instead of having Brad Pitt, we'll have the Israeli army help us out. Or here, for example, here's an Israeli soldier with a drone. And he operates drones during the day and lights Hanukkah candles at night. That's nice. And not to mention sex. All kinds of calendars that the Israeli army produces with Israeli the women soldiers in khaki bikinis carrying M16s on their back on the beach. And you can't get much more of a friendlier sort of image than this of the IDF, of the Israeli army. So framing also becomes a part of the whole thing. So at any rate, I'll leave it at that. But that's kind of what the book is about. What war against the people means, how it's done, how Israel helps the elites of the world do it, and what its implications are in the wider capitalist system that we're living in, that, as we know, is closing in on us more and more and more as neoliberalism progresses. Oxfam just put out a report this week that 1% of the world's population owns half the world's resources. And that'll get worse and worse. And as that gets worse and worse, the repression is going to get worse and worse. And again, it's a repression that's a kind of a war amongst the people, against the people. It's a securocratic type of war we're going to be facing. And if we, because we're all going to be targeted, I would assume in this room, more or less. So if we want to develop effective strategies of resistance, we've got to get in and know this stuff and know what the system is that we should be fighting. So I'll leave it at that. Questions, comments, arguments?
Does it make any sense not buying avocados from West Bank?
Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense.
But against these trillions of
Yeah.
worth of business, a couple of avocados.
Right. I mean, look, there's all kinds of levels of fighting. I mean, you do what you can do. I mean, I also don't think you have to go out and go fight Lockheed. And, you know, I mean, you can do what you can do. But certainly, I think, standing up against the Israeli occupation and explaining to people why we're not buying avocados and raising consciousness about this is the beginning. I mean, I'm not eliminating any level of resistance. So sometimes you start at the simple and what people can do. So, I mean, it's not going to end the occupation. But, you know, if you connect it up to a wider set of resistance and you explain it. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but, you know, it's been out on the Facebook that the major supermarket here in Slovenia took Israeli produce off its shelves. I've heard that's not true, but it was out on Facebook anyway. But, you know, so I don't know if it's true or if there's thinking in that direction, but you know that you go from avocados to those kinds of actions that begins to mean something.
But the way I understand is not buying avocados will make Palestinians even more nervous, feeding the anger of feeding the Israelis,
Right.
so they have more war, right?
Well, I mean, you have to do it strategically. I mean, the whole idea of BDS. I mean, it's true that the Palestinians pay a price. You know, if you're doing BDS, you're not buying products made in settlements that employ Palestinians in many cases. But that's part of the equation. I mean, that was the same in South Africa. You have to make a decision, and not all the people make the decision, but it's strategic to say, in the short term, we're going to suffer. But we're going to make the system untenable, unsustainable, and by doing an effective boycott like that, in the end, we're going to bring down the occupation. So it's hard in the short term, but that's your only way to resist. And then in the long term, you try to create conditions where people get real salaries.
Wouldn't it make more sense to press the buyers of Israel, like not
To do what?
Israel itself?
To
Press the buyers or Arab League or whoever, not the Israel itself, because Israel is obviously just the tool in the hands of other forces, right?
Right. Yeah, but Israel's the occupying power, so that's, you know, it becomes a target, I think.
after all you said, you still believe in a solution?
To the conflict?
No.
Yeah. No, I mean, if look, I think I'm writing all this as an activist. If I'm not, my point is, and it's good you say that because I have to always remind myself, the point isn't to scare us and intimidate us. Somebody said, it's true, if I didn't know who you were and the context of this talk, I think you're from the Israeli Chamber of Commerce. Sounds great. Whoa. Where do I buy these weapons? Israel is this wonderful, super efficient military power. If I was the head of a state, I'd hire Israel immediately. So the reason I'm doing this, of course, is not to intimidate us, but rather to say that, again, that we have to know what we're facing. So, but I'm doing this as an activist. If I didn't believe that we could strategize and that we could resist, I wouldn't be doing this. And it's the same with Israel-Palestine. We're fighting huge forces here. We're fighting governments. Governments aren't our friends. We're fighting economic forces. We're fighting Israel's ability to sell the occupation abroad. There's a lot of reasons why the occupation won't end. So who are we? But we have to keep fighting against it and marshal what resources we have. So that, I think we've done very well so far, actually. If you think of the BDS movement, it's really grown. Israel, for everything else, hasn't pacified the Palestinians. For everything else, with all this technology I'm talking about, it hasn't even pacified Gaza, that erupts every few years. So that resistance, the Palestinians show us that resistance is possible. And the BDS campaign shows us that it's possible to mobilize millions of people and isolate Israel. And in the end, kind of force our governments to do what they should be doing as well. And we have human rights at our disposal as an instrument, and we have international law. So we're not powerless as the people. But we need strategies, so we're not very well organized. That's true. And our big weakness in Israel-Palestine is that we don't have an end game. In other words, we're not telling people what the BDS for. We want to end the occupation, that's true, but what do we want? 1 state, 2 states, 10 states, a regional confederation, a binational state, just a democratic, there's all kinds of, you can end the occupation and get something worse. What happened after the Iranian Revolution? So the end of the Shah's regime, and so that's one of our struggles, I think, and that is that we have to begin to formulate what we want. And we haven't done that yet. So part of my other work, when I deal more with Israel-Palestine, is working to try to articulate and formulate what a just solution would look like. And from my point of view, it's, like I said before, taking all of Israel-Palestine and transforming it into one democratic binational state. I think that would meet the needs of both peoples, but also it's the most doable thing to do if the two-state solution is gone. So I do work on that level as well. But tonight I talked about this other stuff, global Palestine. You have a question?
I do, yes. It's obvious that you're not going to win this battle on the battlefield, and the solution has to come in some sort of movement, like in Arab Spring or something like that, and the strategy is like that. So my question is, what is the left in Israel doing? I hope you have somebody to talk to in Israel.
Not many people. The left in Israel, the anti-Zionist left is very, very tiny. You have a Zionist left, even the Labor Party to some degree, the Meretz Party, Peace Now, even Breaking the Silence, which is this movement of soldiers. But you know, that's part of our struggle. The Zionist left still wants Israel to be a Jewish state. So it's locked into a two-state solution, which means then that the idea is that you'll have Israel and alongside of it the state of Palestine. But an activist like me that spends time, and I'm also an anthropologist, so I kind of get a feel for the ground. When you're out, you see there is no space that could become a Palestinian state. It's gone. So the Zionist left is trapped because it has a conception of where it would like to go in terms of two states, but it can't get there. And we, on the non-Zionist, the very left, with the Palestinians, we have a concept of a solution that could actually work, but we don't have the support for it, because you can't get Israelis to give up the idea of a Jewish state. You're asking a country to really redefine itself. Now that's why I'm here and not in Tel Aviv, because I think we have to mobilize the international forces and isolate Israel and force Israel to transform itself. That's what happened with South Africa. You know, with South Africa, it couldn't sustain apartheid in the end because of international pressures. But when apartheid ended in South Africa, it wasn't some technical thing. Okay, now the black Africans can vote. But the whole country reinvented itself. You know, South Africa had a new constitution, and it had to redefine itself as a non-racial country, which was very different from how it had seen it. So it wasn't just some technical change. So that's what we're trying to advocate here, that Israel would remain Israel in a sense, but it would be transformed into a country of all its citizens. So it would have to reinvent itself. It would have to become a binational state in which it's true you would still have Israeli Jews, you'd still have a Hebrew university, you'd still speak Hebrew, you'd still have Haaretz newspaper and so on, but within a larger binational country in which Palestinians also have equal rights and have their cultures. So it's not an impossible thing. It's happened in history with South Africa, with other countries as well. But it's something that means the international community has to get behind it. We have to work to try to isolate Israel to force it into that situation. And Israel's strategy to get around that is, again, to serve the hegemons. And that's a pretty effective strategy that's hard for us to fight against. So it becomes the people against the elites.
May I follow up on this one? I just maybe this strategy could be turned against Israel, because isn't the Israeli-Palestinian conflict proof that this sort of policing does not work long term? So basically you can hit Israel where it hurts the most. If they project their power by selling this kind of technology to police, and if you show that this kind of technology does not help in solving the problem, then this would actually work against them. So you use their most powerful weapon to project their own power against them.
That's right.
So I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, but Israel uses the opposite line. Israel says, you see, we have pacified the Palestinians.
Which is not true.
You know, which is not true, but you know, or we're in the direction, or it's, you know, and
70 years.
You see, what Israel is really saying to the West is, you have a defeatist attitude. The idea that your armies tell you, your generals tell you, that you can't defeat terrorism. You know, and we have a lot of people saying that with ISIS. That the solution to ISIS is not military. That ISIS is Daesh is a symptom of something deeper. You know, means that you're not going to resolve that issue until you resolve the deeper problems. Israel's saying, no, it's not true. You can isolate them, you can beat them, just like we've beaten the Palestinians, just like we beat Hezbollah and so on. And you can, and Israel's message is one that they want to hear. And that is, you can keep an oppressive capitalist system going and still and still control and pacify whoever rises up against you. Just like we're doing, we're keeping the occupation, we're keeping our repression, we're keeping all of that, and we're also defeating terrorism and defeating the Palestinians. So it's true that that to the degree that Israel doesn't succeed in doing that, it puts a dent in that kind of argument. I mean, one of the reasons why you're going to get another war in Lebanon is because in the last war in 2006, Israel didn't do too well against Hezbollah. And that's exactly, and it can't leave it like that. Because if Hezbollah can beat the Israeli army, then how do we sell our stuff? You see? So that, I think Israel sees itself in being in a process of perfecting its weapons, perfecting the way it's fighting, and its message is, all right, we have setbacks here and there, but basically, look, we can help you beat your enemies. So that's exactly its framing, and we're the enemies to some degree. All right, I don't want to keep you guys all night. Anything else?
Okay, two things. First of all, like the security issue, I think like maybe many people here now are like surprised at how can this be happening like in Israel, but like we in the last couple of months we've been witnessing in Slovenia like the same process going on, and people are just accepting the security idea, and like we still don't have like the wall, but we already have the fence, and people are just accepting it. You know?
That's right.
And most of the people are actually supporting it, and
Yeah,
they are
yeah.
agreeing with the security issue. And also, like there was a protest next to the wire, and you know this drone came, you know, and some people got nervous, but it, like you said, you don't know how to respond, you know, and it came like in like meter presence, you know, and you don't know really what to do because it's something new, you know. So now I'm going.
With a drone?
Yeah.
We're here in town?
And next to the wire where they
Where
have
you
protests, you know.
Because today we were in town.
Yeah.
And there was a drone, some guy was flying a drone around, I didn't know what it was, over the bridge here. There was a drone going around.
Yeah. No, so now I'm going to the second thing. It's like, okay, now you showed us like how we are getting oppressed and all the techniques. So is there already some techniques or ideas how to fight it?
Right.
I imagine you're not gonna put it in the book, you know, because it makes no sense.
Well, I'm involved in kind of a project, some other people. You know, again, Israel is globalizing Palestine. It's saying our struggle with the Palestinians is really a microcosm of a global struggle. And so if you buy our weapons and buy our technologies, you can succeed like we have. And it's the same thing. So I'm doing the same thing in a way in terms of capitalism. I'm trying to, work with people to get to a better understanding of how this capitalist system works. There are some people that write about it, and but then to try to develop what we don't have is a counter-hegemonic strategy. All right, we don't want the capitalist system, or we don't want it the way it is, and it's getting more and more repressive and so on. What are we suggesting? And we of the left we don't have a suggestion. I mean, the fall of socialism in Eastern Europe, and in the Soviet Union and so on, that sort of. But the question is, are there parts of that can be revived? How can you make socialism more relevant? Are there? In other words, what would be, the big task for me in this book what I'm trying to lead towards, I didn't get into it because it was is something like this. And that is that, again, the system we live in is transnational capital. And that's the basis of all the problems. So when you're dealing with, again, it's true, the avocado issue. So if you're fighting women's issues and you're fighting about refugees and you're fighting about human rights and you're fighting about the Congo and Palestine, these are all pieces of a much bigger, this is a global, now you can't fight every issue, it's true, there's a division of labor. But at the same time, somebody or some group of people has to step back and say, what is the system in which all these issues are coming out of? Because they're all coming out of a larger world system that's a system of transnational capital. And in particular, more and more we're aware of it, that it's a more violent system, and the violence and the paranoia of security and trying to really control our lives. France today is living under a state of emergency. A state of emergency means all your democratic protections are gone. So one of the largest countries in Europe is already there. So this isn't some theoretical, this is a process. And once you declare a state of emergency, you don't undeclare it. It's supposed to be for 3 months. Let's see if in fact at the end of 3 months, France rescinds it and goes back to normal. I would doubt it, you see. And so one of the questions is, it's not only a question of more and more repression, but it's repression for a reason. In other words, security hides a political agenda of the elites. This is a framing issue, because that's why we're using alternative language. Security is a bad word to use, because security you buy into the system. Who doesn't want to be secure? Of course I want to be secure. I want to be able to fly in an airplane and be secure, so I go through all the security of the airport, and I want the state to secure me. So if it's really a matter of security, what's the problem here? I want to be secured against the bad people. But if in fact security is covering and justifying and creating a system in which our democratic liberties and our civil liberties are being constricted, and it's allowing the elites more and more freedom in neoliberalism to do whatever they want to do, and it's cutting back on our ability to resist and to criticize, and so on. Then security, and I think this is, you see with the Patriot Act in the U.S., you had 9/11. Within an hour and a half, the Patriot Act was passed in the United States. So the Patriot Act that really very much constricts civil liberties in the United States wasn't all of a sudden formulated after 9/11. It was in the drawer. This is what the neoliberals and the conservatives wanted all along. It's a and they were looking for the moment in which they could implement it. I think the state of emergency in France, I think, is something that a lot of the elites in France wanted all along, but were only able. This is the whole point of the shock doctrine of Naomi Klein's book, how you use shocks and disasters in order to implement programs like in Pinochet's Chile and other places that you wanted to do anyway. So we're in a capitalist system where there are ruling classes and there are interests, and they do want more and more and more, and it's against our interests, and there's a class war. I mean, and a lot of these are old-fashioned words, but it doesn't mean that it's not true anymore. Class struggle and so on, and warfare as policing as a form of class struggle. So that, and in a sense, that's coming out now very strongly. So, but we're not very aware of it. We don't have a concept of it, and we don't know how to fight it. And we don't have that big picture. So the question is, can we analyze, can we get into an analysis of what the problem is and how they're doing it, and then work through that system, the way I've been talking, and to try to get to what I call a human-centric hegemony. This is, I think, what, I mean, you might call it socialism, or you might call it, or we have to articulate, this is a hegemony in which, rather than capital being the logic of the principle around which everything works, human beings and the needs of human beings are the principle around which the world system works. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. So how do you construct that? That's something we should be doing. You see, and I'm involved in sort of a project, but that's what the left has to do. We can't only resist and fight this and this and this all the time. We've got to come up with our own conception of what a human-centric counter-hegemony, where are we going? And I think one of the problems, for example, with the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street and so on, was that it really resonated with people. And you know, people really got it. But in the end, we didn't articulate what we wanted. What was the alternative to capitalism? And we lost everybody. It all fell apart because we weren't suggesting anything. And that's where I think we should start going. And so my book is sort of trying to revive the idea that there is a world system, to describe the world system. And then in particular, of course, my book takes one piece of that world system, which is the securocratic piece. It doesn't deal with economics, it doesn't deal with the capitalist system the way it works. I mean, there's a lot of things it doesn't deal with. It focuses on one part of the capitalist system. I mean, Marx himself wrote almost nothing about militarism. You don't have in left research, the military is really the most neglected area in warfare and so on. So, you know, I was trying to fill that in. But this is the big project. And unless we can begin to articulate where we're going as people, then it makes our movement very weak.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.